Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
There were some surprises in Tuesday's primary election, which tested newly drawn districts and the top two primary for the very first time. Voters also approved new term limits for state lawmakers, while the cigarette tax seems headed for defeat. Pension reform measures, which were passed by wide margins in San Jose and San Diego, are already facing legal challenges. The beleaguered city of Stockton may be closer to filing for Chapter 9 bankruptcy protection. Plus, Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi reflects on her 25 years in Congress, which lies ahead in this election year. Coming up next. Good evening. I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight from the Capitol, Dan Walters, Sacramento Bee political columnist. And in studio, Scott Smith, Stockton Record City Hall reporter. And Carla Marinucci, San Francisco Chronicle senior political writer. Carla, so now it's over with. There were some surprises. What happened that people had not expected?
That's right. Well, surprises is that something in politics happened. Change actually came. It did what it was supposed to do, which was to change the system, shake up the incumbents, shake up the jigsaw puzzle a little bit, and we actually saw that. We saw incumbents who got the message that they can no longer coast anymore. A few of them a little bit of a surprise when you talk about Pete Stark in the East Bay coming in just really ahead of an almost unknown challenger, Eric Swalwell. Pete Stark being in office 20 terms. In the Southern California, that huge race, Howard Berman versus Brad Sherman. Berman's been in office 4 decades. These guys faced one of the biggest challenges that this primary brought to them. Totally redrawn lines in their districts. In many cases, these incumbents had to introduce themselves to whole new groups of voters, and so you had people really spending a lot of money to hold on to their seats, and they are not guaranteed going into November.
Well, Carla said some surprises. Dan Walters, you have seen it all. Were you surprised by anything that happened there?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the system, as Carla said, did work the way it was supposed to. It did new lines, top two primary. You're going to have a lot of races in the fall in which Democrats are going to face Democrats like Berman and Sherman, and Republicans are going to be facing Republicans. That's a new wrinkle that we haven't seen before. And there were some surprises. For example, the Democrats couldn't even get a candidate on the ballot then. A district down in Southern California they thought they were going to win. So yeah, there were some little shake-up here and there. And remember, a lot of incumbent congressmen dropped out rather than even try to run for re-election this year.
And you know, another aspect too, Dan, was the independents and how they came out in this. You know, we know that independents are 1 out of 5 voters in this state. So a lot of people thought people like Chad Condit in the Central Valley or Nathan Fletcher, who was running for mayor in San Diego, would do well in that kind of atmosphere. No, independents really didn't have much of a showing. Both of those lost, and you know, I think that was a little bit of a surprise on the political front here.
You watched the numbers or read about them, if not covering them, on election night. What was new down in the Central Valley?
Well, an interesting race we were watching was, of course, between Ricky Gill, Republican, young Republican candidate, 21 years old, trying to unseat Jerry McNerney, the incumbent candidate, and it was a close race. There was a spread of about 3 or 4 points.
That was a fascinating race.
It's an interesting race. The Republican Party, I think, has thrown a lot of support behind Ricky Gill.
Yeah, this is a rising star, Ricky Gill, Indian American, very young. A lot of people say really he's never held a
He's a little over
job.
21, though. His birthday was a couple of weeks ago.
He just turned 25, which makes him, and he just graduated from college, I think, within the week. So, yeah.
But going forward, I think that's going to be really one to watch in the Central Valley. I mean, we've really seen it that this time around, the redrawn lines, as Dan said, the party-on-party aspect of it, you know, and there's some other aspects of this primary, too, we should mention. Dianne Feinstein, who was up against 23 opponents. A lot of people in the Republican Party were fearing that Orly Tates, who is a birther, who is way far to the right, was going to sort of embarrass the party and end up. She didn't. She's going to be up against Elizabeth Emken, who is from Danville. That's an interesting one. And then I think on the initiatives. Dan, I think that's something that you might talk about too. You're in the home of the
lobbyist up there, so how well did they do?
The tobacco initiative. Right. Was that a big surprise? I think the way it came out, 7-1, they were outspent.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a surprise at the end because it was obviously the pro side was going down. But I think it demonstrates, if nothing else, that taxes are tricky. There's a measure that started out with about 2/3 voter support and probably going to wind up losing. Yes, a lot of money was spent against it, but obviously the message was there about taxes. And so it's something to be watched in the fall because we're going to have a couple of tax measures on the ballot in the fall. And even though the electorate will be much larger in the fall and more diverse than this one, it indicates that a properly constructed opposition campaign that's well-financed can beat taxes at the polls.
Okay, so there should have been some celebrating by some in Sacramento over term limits, right?
Oh, yeah, the legislators love it, except remember, it doesn't affect those in office now. It only affects prospectively those in the future. And who will really impact our Democratic legislative leaders will be able to stay in their leadership positions longer in the future, as maybe as many as 10 years or so. Those are the people who will really benefit from this.
Yeah, we're talking about Prop 28, which extends the time that you can stay in the legislature a dozen years versus staying in one house for a portion of that time and then moving over to the other.
That's right.
And so I guess that's going to solve the problem of the legislature becoming stronger than those who lobby them.
No, it won't. No, it won't.
Absolutely.
No, you know better than that, Bella.
Well, Dan, you too wrote some interesting things about the pension fight that's going on and what happened this election cycle with San Jose as well as with San Diego.
I think those were very, very interesting. Those are large cities. Those are the second and third largest city in California, and the vote for pension reform was overwhelming, like 2/3 in both those cities. And at least in the case of San Jose, that's a liberal Democratic city. That should be a wake-up call for the public employee unions that they cannot hold out indefinitely on pension reform. It should strengthen the hand of the governor, who's asking for pension reform and saying it's needed to convince voters to vote for new taxes. But clearly still, the legislative leadership and the Democratic majority in the legislature is very reluctant to go against the unions on this issue because, frankly, they owe the unions. They're completely dependent on the unions for campaign money, and the governor's dependent on them for money for his tax measures. So it makes for a very yeasty sort of situation.
And Dan, you know, the governor said this week, we talked to him on this issue, said that these two cities really were sort of a landmark, that this is more than Wisconsin. San Jose and San Diego, the vote there was something that the nation was watching. I mean, do you think that this is sort of a canary in the coal mine for the whole nation when it comes to it? You mentioned very liberal cities, and these were huge votes, 2-1 in favor of pension reform, especially in a city like San Jose where they've seen libraries close and people get cut, firefighters and so forth.
Well,
I think it is big because if you notice they got big attention by the national news media. I mean, New York Times and CNN and all these people, and NBC made it their lead item as the California election. This is big stuff. This is coupling with what happened in Wisconsin. This is a very big thing.
But both of you, these were promises made by officials to these workers that this was what they could give up part of a raise that they were looking for or whatever have you. They could exchange benefits if they would whether they could take less wages and and trade that for pension benefits.
Well, but there was a caveat in that. The caveat was at the time that all these improvements in pensions were made about 10 or 12 years ago. The stock market was booming. The pension funds were rolling in money, but they have since lost hundreds of billions of dollars in California, and now that's the taxpayers are on the hook for those promises.
Well, it's interesting now, do the unions get the message, Dan, that if they don't come up with some reforms here or offer some kind of compromise, that the voters will be the ones to act. That seemed to be the message in San Jose.
It certainly is the message, and the question is whether the legislature will actually take that seriously or whether they'll just do some kind of cosmetic, sort of superficial pension changes hoping that will make it all go away.
Well, what about the courts fights that is supposed to follow this?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah.
Under California law, these pension benefits are supposedly sacrosanct. And this leads up to your situation in Stockton. There's a great fear among union leaders that if a city goes bankrupt, it might go to bankruptcy court, and federal bankruptcy law might supersede that pension benefits and actually order them to be cut. That's why the unions are pushing legislation in Sacramento to make it more difficult for cities to declare bankruptcy.
Well, the president was here
Right.
on the same time.
Right.
And did he acknowledge anything about the results out of Wisconsin or
No,
San Diego or San Jose?
Yeah, that was the very interesting thing, Belva, about being there in the fundraiser with him in San Francisco. A lot of the donors I talked to there said, hey, we're very interested to hear what he has to say. The fact is, this is a very difficult thing for him to walk. He didn't participate in Wisconsin. He didn't even mention it, frankly, and I think that was a little bit of a surprise to folks. At the same time, politically, as Dan said, this is a very delicate issue, even for the governor, going forward. He said it was imperative, but now we have to see what he's going to do and how much he's going to demand from the union. So at this point, no. We haven't heard much from Obama on Wisconsin or what happened here in California.
Well, back to pensions again, because I think that played a role in what happened in Stockton, didn't it? With Stockton not having the money to keep the city running properly because they have put so much money into future planning on pensions.
That is certainly one of the stressors going on right now. Sort of the big story in Stockton this week was that the city council agreed to give the city manager the authority to file for bankruptcy protection, which sort of the underlying theme here is that Stockton will be, if that comes to pass, the largest city in the nation to file for bankruptcy after Vallejo, which just emerged from that. So certainly that's happened. What's going on is the city is still in mediation. They're trying to work out new deals with the creditors, with the retirees, with the labor groups, and the deadline for that is June 25th. So we're just really a couple of weeks away. And the city has laid out their plan, their timeline. They say if we can't make a deal in this confidential mediation by June 25th, the next day, you might have a bankruptcy filing from Stockton.
And what, just technically, the average citizen in Stockton, what is it going to mean to them? How are they going to see changes? Is it going to be immediately apparent? What happens?
That's the big fear now. Is what happens to me? Will the grass get cut in the parks? Will there be police officers? And the city says yes. If that happens, we're going to continue doing business as usual. People will not necessarily know that the city's in bankruptcy. That's the idea. They're trying to send the message that what they're trying to do now in mediation and bankruptcy is go after, say, the bondholders that Stockton over-leveraged itself for these capital projects, the arena, the ballpark, and not go after, again, public employee pay. So they're not going to go after that with the hopes that Stockton firefighters and police officers don't leave en masse.
Let me offer a little sidelight to that whole thing. I followed that Stockton situation. I think the key here thing is the bankers who hold those bonds. There's a sense around the thing that those bankers are going to be very tough, that they really don't want to take a haircut because the banking industry in general could see a wave of these kind of municipal bond bankruptcies that would absolutely destroy the municipal bond market if they have to give up some of that money. And so I have a hunch that these bankers are going to really hang tough on this. As we know, Wells Fargo is already trying to reclaim some of the property it has mortgages on. I think my sense of the thing is that this is probably going to wind up, in fact, in bankruptcy court.
But we're talking about bankers and housing here. Weren't they also quite a hunk of what the problems are with Stockton?
Yeah, they allowed Stockton to issue bonds, and in some cases it was backed by the general fund for Stockton, which really puts Stockton at risk of ending up in some serious problems. Stockton can't pay its bills. The general fund, which pays for police and fire, is on the hook for that. So that's the big fear.
And what about the foreclosure rate or the building rate? That was one of the things that encouraged Stockton to build these arenas. And other
certainly
things.
in the boom years, not too long ago. In fact, I think the numbers are in the peak year, Stockton issued 3,000 building permits for new homes. A lot of people from the Bay Area were coming over to Stockton for a piece of the American dream, and I think the number is now something like 125. So that really gives you a picture of the numbers and what's underpinning the problem. People are losing their homes now. They don't have jobs. The city's not reaping property taxes and sales taxes.
But you also can't let those politicians off the hook. They're the ones who mortgage Stockton's future for these grandiose projects in downtown Stockton. And you know, there's an old saying: if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And they thought this boom was going to go on forever, and they were not very smart about it.
Dan, are there other cities in California where we're looking at the same kind of scenario?
Yeah, that we are looking at. In fact, there's another city already in the same straits as Stockton, a much smaller city of Mammoth Lakes, and they're even using the bankruptcy, the B word, in Los Angeles, the state's largest city. They've talked about it in San Diego because of some of their pension problems. Look, this is a wildfire. If the economy doesn't rebound sharply soon, and these pension costs keep building up, and these bondholders start putting on the pressure, you're going to see a lot of cities flirting, at least, with bankruptcy in California in the next few years.
And some big cities to boot.
Yeah.
Well, let's move to the California focus problems and look to a Californian who's facing national problems, and that is Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. She was recently in San Francisco. I spoke with her prior to Tuesday's election about her 25 years in the House and what she sees for the future of California. Well, first I want to start by welcoming you here and then to congratulate you on 25 years of service and getting a street named after you in Golden Gate Park.
Well, I was embarrassed by having the street named because it seemed, so much, and for having the privilege of representing San Francisco in the Congress, and then I get an honor on top of that.
Many changes in that 25 years. 25 years ago, when you first announced you were going to run for Congress, people just couldn't believe it. With the help of another woman, your predecessor, Sala Burton, you made the run, you were successful. Can you compare the mood of the country and those in politics about women as candidates then and now?
Sala was remarkable in that she decided that she wanted me to be in Congress. Now, men do that all the time, but when a woman did that and recommended another woman, people were stunned by it, as was I. I had absolutely no intention of running for Congress. When I got there, there were no more than a couple dozen women out of 435 members. We now have nearly 80 women members. Not enough, but in very strong positions of power in the Congress.
This year is being referred to by some as the year of the woman in politics, but it's also being pegged as a year when there's a war against women or against the issues that women care about. Which is it?
The American people are way ahead of the Congress when it comes to the empowerment and leadership of women. On the outside, people want more women elected to Congress. The policies of some in the Congress now, whether it's a war or not, are certainly very disrespectful of women, disrespectful of women's ability to know what's best for them in terms of the size and timing of their families, disrespectful of women when we talk about the Violence Against Women's Act, disrespectful of women in the workplace, and also disrespectful when we're now talking about pay equity. They say it's a myth. There's no difference in pay for women and men in the workplace, to name a few, differences. But on the outside, people know that the most wholesome thing you can do for the political and governmental process is to elect more women.
You're called leader now. So as a leader, how and what is your strategy going to be to take back the House?
Well, we have a drive for 25. That means that's the number of seats the Democrats need to take back the majority in the House of Representatives. We have fabulous candidates, many of them women. Majority of our challengers to take back the House are women, and we're very, very proud of them. I think women will lead the way. California will be central to this.
You've also, throughout your career, been a leader in fighting for civil rights, gay rights. You're at the forefront of the whole crisis over HIV/AIDS. How do you think the same-sex marriage debate will play out in this coming election?
Younger people, people thinking in a more fair way about our country, don't want to support any form of discrimination, and neither does our president. So to hear a president of the United States come forth in the very personal and lovely way that he did was really a great moment, I think, for our country.
How are your energies as a leader in the House? You know, the impression is by many that the Congress doesn't do very much except have debates over what they disagree on.
Well, I'm very proud of the work that we did in the 4 years that we were in the majority. In the House, the Speaker has awesome power and sets the legislative agenda. And in that time, especially when President Obama was there to sign the bills for ending discrimination in the workplace, to the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, one of the last bills he signed, first and last, ending discrimination now in the military, in between legislation that expanded freedom for our country, made our economy fairer with the legislation for Wall Street reform and consumer protection. Of course, the jewel in the crown for us was health care for all Americans as a right, not a privilege.
Well, the Supreme Court is about to make a key decision in that area. Yeah. Some charge, though, that you and President Obama wasted political strength by taking on that issue so early in his campaign.
We still believe that it was necessary for the American people, for us to improve quality, lower cost, and expand opportunity to participate in it. We feel we stand with those who put forth Social Security, Medicare, and now health care for all Americans as a right, not a privilege. It creates 4 million jobs. People say, why don't you do jobs instead of health care? No, it creates 4 million jobs. And you know what? It also reduces cost.
You were recently in Afghanistan, where you met with women from all over that region. Did you find similarities between what those women were talking to you about and what you hear here at home?
Every Mother's Day, I visit our troops in the war zone to thank them for keeping our families safe. I also celebrate the leadership of women members in the military who are their moms and grandmothers, believe it or not, who are serving our country to keep us safe. And when I'm there, I visit with the Afghan women as well, whether it's in the provinces or in Kabul or some combination of that. Right now, there's some important decisions being made about Afghanistan and how we leave, when we do, and we will, that we leave the women in a place that has advanced their cause since we went before we went there.
Well, we can't leave this without finding out about your interests of returning to that coveted title within the Congress, Speaker.
It's never been about my being Speaker. It's always been about Democrats having the majority so that we can work in a way that makes the future better, that reignites the American dream, to build ladders of opportunity for people who want to work hard, play by the rules, take responsibility to succeed.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Leader Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you.
Well, Dan, how do you think that the leader, Nancy Pelosi, is going to do with getting those seats from California to help with that magic 25?
I don't think they're going to do as well as they had once hoped. They used to talk about as many as 8 seats in California, about a third of all they needed to pick up control again. And they didn't do particularly well in this week's election. They blew it in a couple of districts, and they would be good to get 3 or 4 seats maybe. That's a long way from 8. And you remember, they need those seats in California because they're losing seats because of growth and the gain in seats in red states like Texas. They need seats out of places like California to get to that. I think it's going to be a very tough row to hoe for her.
And Dan, we're seeing some of the seats right now where the Democrats have to be sweating this out. The McNerney seat, which you mentioned, he didn't come in that much ahead of Ricky Gill. Lois Capps and Abel Maldonado, who's now been pinpointed by the GOP as one of their young guns, somebody they're going to help out. They're going to help Ricky Gill, and they're also going to help Kim Vann, a woman who's running against John Garamendi up near Sacramento. This is going to be areas where they thought maybe some of these seats were safe, and Dan mentioned the seat in Southern California where there isn't even a Democrat running, Gary Miller versus Bob Dutton. That was a real disappointment and a blow to Nancy Pelosi's drive to 25.
And there's a seat down in the San Joaquin Valley where they didn't get their candidate in, and it looks like that's probably going to wind up in Republican hands as well. So this wasn't a good election for the Democrats in California in terms of getting their congressional ducks in order.
Well, we know there was lots of attention to San Joaquin County this time around. Is it an alert electorate? Can the Democrats expect more boost with the larger turnout?
We'll see. We'll hope the turnout's a lot better in November. There's a record low turnout in this primary statewide, and especially in San Joaquin County, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay. A wish for, maybe you get. Well, that is all for us for tonight. We thank you, both of you, for joining us here tonight, and we thank you also, Dan, for being with us. Please visit kqed.org/thisweek for our show archives and to sign up for our newsletter and our podcasts and to share your thoughts about the program. You'll also find a link to all of KQED's election coverage there. We leave you with images of the new Oyster Point Ferry Terminal in South San Francisco, which just launched this week and should make life a lot easier for a lot of people. I'm Belva Davis. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.